Welcome to Legally Agile with Chris Werner.
Welcome back to Legally Agile, the podcast for founders and executives of high-growth companies who want legal strategy that keeps up with the business. I'm your host, Evan Mack, and I'm here with attorney Chris Werner, founder of Vidar Law. Chris helps high-growth businesses navigate risk, seize opportunity, and stay legally agile without slowing that momentum. Today, we're unpacking the idea of a fractional general counsel, what it is, when it makes sense, and how having strategic legal partners can prevent the kind of disputes and surprises that derail fast-growing companies. Chris, sir, welcome back.
Thank you, Evan. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. Chris, so how do you define that fractional general counsel in a way that distinguishes it from simply bringing in an outside lawyer when issues arise?
Yeah, so I think there's two basic categories of how people think of their legal counsel. It's either an in-house or general counsel versus an outside lawyer. And within the in-house general counsel category, what we've seen more and more in the industry is what we call fractional general counsel. So this is sort of a hybrid between somebody who's sitting full-time in your office and somebody who is outside of your organization. And the fractional general counsel is designed for smaller companies. Usually they are fast-growing companies. Usually they have quite a few legal needs, but they don't necessarily want to either pay for, or they don't they're not quite ready for somebody to sit full-time in their office and to really start building out an internal legal team. So the fractional general counsel kind of hits that sweet spot for a lot of companies.
So, Chris, in a typical week, what kind of work does a fractional GC handle for a growing company, or across contracts, product questions, employment issues, or governance matters?
Yeah, so the fractional general counsel, if done correctly, handles most of those things that you touched on. They operate as part of your permanent team. They just are not there full time. They're not at a seat in your office space full time. They're not on your full time payroll. They're paid outside. But so in a typical, let's say a typical month, because I think with smaller companies, a typical week can vary quite a bit week to week. But in a typical month or quarter, I might handle board of directors meetings where I will help prepare a presentation for the board. I will handle corporate documents. We tend to, especially in fast-growing companies, those things get amended and updated quite a bit, and it's important to regularly take a look at them. So I will spend time with founders going over that. Contracts, obviously, one of the things that I do as a fractional general counsel is help build out standard agreements, standard contracts, and then train the company and their employees on how to use those and deploy those. Any growing technology company or growing company, a lot of times you'll get one-off things that are strange. And so I'll field phone calls. Sometimes it's from the founders or the executives. In some cases, after I've built up a relationship, it may be with employees directly. They'll have my number or my email and reach out and say, hey, I have a question about this agreement or this client. So it really does run sort of a broad spectrum of what I would handle on a monthly or quarterly basis for a client.
So for companies that bring you in as a fractional GC, how integrated do you usually become with their team in terms of communication and involvement from those day-to-day decisions?
Yeah, so ideally I will be very integrated into those teams. The more I can become integrated, the more helpful I can be in understanding the needs, understanding sort of the pace of what the business is doing, and anticipating potential problems before they arise. I've had clients where, as I said, their employees, it's not just the founders or the executives who call me, but the employees call me. And, it's funny. Yesterday, I was just having lunch with a guy who was an employee at a company where I was the fractional general counsel. He is now getting into business with another guy. So I may be brought in to help a brand new business, but he and I became good friends. And, at the time he was an employee of the company where I was the general counsel. And, we had a sort of very close relationship, had a lot of discussions with things that came up, over the course of several years.
As companies scale, they tend to kind of move through different levels of legal support. How would you describe the stages of legal maturity you commonly see in your experience?
Yeah, so I guess I'll put it in three categories. Obviously, there's lots of gray area in between. The first stage is really just at the starting gate, right? Where maybe you use a lawyer to do some basic entity formation and some early stuff. From me, when those kind of people reach out, it's usually maybe a couple of hours, real quick consultation, get the entity set up, which is fast and fairly inexpensive. Other companies tend to do DIY there, and I don't have any real problem with that. Obviously, there are some things that can be missed, but in those early stages, that's fine. So that's kind of early stage, DIY, or maybe you get a couple of, an hour or two with a lawyer just to check things, but that's it. So then when you start growing a little bit more, you decide, hey, I need somebody more regularly. And you can do one of two things. You can do ad hoc, sort of call a lawyer to address a specific problem when that comes up for you. Or what I think is better for a lot of people is you start working with a fractional general counsel. They're also outside of your organization, but they become integrated and they start to learn your business and they start to learn what you're doing. They can get a lot more ingrained in your organization, how it functions, and what the needs are. So that's kind of the next stage. Then once that, some companies will grow where they need even more than that. And that's where you hire a full-time general counsel, and maybe you start to build out an internal legal team. So some very large organizations may have hundreds of lawyers that are on staff, full-time employees of their company to deal with various legal issues, and they'll be divided up. It's just like sort of a captive law firm within your company. But that's for the biggest companies, right?
So Chris, what are the practical advantages of or trade-offs you see across those stages? From ad hoc outside counsel to the fractional GC to eventually an in-house legal team.
Let's talk advantages and disadvantages. So
Yeah.
an ad hoc outside counsel, an advantage of that could be that for each individual issue that you come up with, you can go out and find an expert who just deals with that issue, right? So if you've got an employee dispute, right, and you say, okay, well, my employee is suing me, I'm going to go out and find an outside counsel to deal with this dispute who just deals with employee disputes on behalf of companies. They have a lot of expertise there, for sure. The downside is that the company itself has to identify the issues and then go out and find the counsel. And that outside counsel tends to focus on solving whatever problem has been put in front of them. And so their focus is fairly narrow. And what I find a lot of times, and I've seen companies have disputes with their outside counsel, what I find is they may miss other potential solutions, right? So they may, it's this old adage, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You go out and hire a specialist in a particular area of law to deal with a particular dispute, they're going to deal with that dispute in the way they know how to deal with it. They may not be looking for the creative solutions. And a lot of times a small business will need a creative solution that's not going to drain their bank account. The fractional general counsel addresses some of the weaknesses in the ad hoc. So what it does is it tries to come in, really get to know your business. And a good fractional general counsel tends to be a legal generalist. They know a lot of stuff about a lot of different issues. They're able to sort of think through creative solutions to your problems based on your business and what you're particularly trying to do. Also, a good fractional general counsel and a good full-time general counsel will go out and hire those specialists for you when they are needed. So your fractional general counsel can come in and say, hey, you know what? We've got this issue that is going to require a specialist. I've identified this. We definitely need this specialist. I'm going to go out and find this specialist for you, and I'm going to manage the specialist for you, right? So I'm going to, if I'm the fractional general counsel and I say, hey, I need a specialist to deal with a particular patent issue, I'll go find that specialist, and then I will also direct that specialist in as to where they need to go. And a business owner may not know what they need to be telling, a patent lawyer on those things. They may just say, well, I've got this patent issue, fix it. And the patent lawyer will look at it and say, okay, well, this is my solution to fix it. If you have a fractional general counsel, they can say to that patent attorney, hey, yes, fix it, but you can't do these things because of this other issue going on with the business, right? And then a full-time general counsel, well, the advantages of that versus a fractional general counsel is you've literally got them there full time, right? They are always available to you. They are always there. The disadvantage, obviously, is going to be the price, right? You're going to pay them more to do it. And if you're not quite ready for that, you may be overpaying for that. You may be unnecessarily spending portions of your budget that you could better use in other places of your business.
Without naming details, is there a situation where a company waited until the crisis to involve counsel, and an early involvement would have maybe changed the outcome?
Yeah. So I've had a client fairly recently, and before I started working with them, they had a dispute with some of their minority shareholders of the company, and they hired, sort of an ad hoc lawyer to represent them in the dispute, and it got very messy because that lawyer was looking at a single tool and saying, okay, well, what we need to do is file a lawsuit to solve this shareholders dispute. And also what ended up happening is the shareholders sort of split up into different groups. There was one group that was involved in one part of a lawsuit and an eventual settlement, and then another group that weren't part of that. And again, it wasn't coordinated. The client was trying to coordinate, but the client was, they didn't know what they didn't know.
Right.
And then they had another outside lawyer to do a different portion of the dispute. And what ended up happening, long story short, and I apologize, I tend to tell long stories. They ended up spending 2 years in litigation and ended up spending quite a bit of money on legal fees. The dispute didn't resolve the way that they wanted to. They ended up having to pay quite a bit of money to some of these shareholders. And it became quite a mess. And had they had somebody who had worked with them as a fractional general counsel, they could have looked at the whole dispute, and there was a very easy solution that would have at least avoided the 2 years of litigation to that company. And so, we're talking about several $100,000 in legal fees that they paid over the course of that time that was completely unnecessary. And so in the short term, bringing in a fractional general counsel, yes, there's usually, a monthly fee or retainer or something else. But in that situation, they could have saved themselves a lot of money had they had somebody who understood what was going on, who understood the business, and wasn't just sort of putting out a problem to an outside counsel and saying, go solve this problem however you can.
And on the flip side, have you seen an example where being integrated early helped the company navigate that complex issue efficiently to avoid that larger problem?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a trickier question because if I've avoided problems, you don't always know that I've avoided those problems. So it's sometimes hard to quantify that. But I have had I've had a small business client. They were growing and they were taking in an investment, and I had been involved with them very early. And the investor was a private equity group, and they came in thinking that because this was small and it was sort of a mom and pop style company, it was a family owned business. There was a little bit of equity grants to a couple of other people, but mostly just a family owned business. But I had worked with them early, and we had spent before the private equity came in, we had spent a couple of years sort of slowly cleaning things up. We standardized contracts, we standardized agreements. I worked quite a bit with their outside accounting firm. So we made sure that the financial documents were all in order. And the private equity group came in thinking, well, we'll be able to lowball this offer because there's going to be all kinds of problems here. And we were able to hand them, a data room of all of our company information, well organized. And nobody would quantify this specifically, but I know from conversations that I had with some of the people at the private equity that the price that they ended up paying was a premium to what they thought they would pay because they had so little work they had to do on the back end of cleaning it up. So, like I said, it's hard to quantify that, but there are definitely, I have seen real benefits for that. And a lot of times it comes in getting a higher multiple on either from your investors, or if you're selling a portion of your company or the entire company, you're going to get more out of it if you get this stuff done correctly.
And Chris, when somebody begins that initial conversation with you, what does it typically cover so they can determine whether the model is a good fit for their business?
So I end up really customizing what the pricing model looks like based on the stage of the business. So if you are early, seed funding, angel funding, taking on your Series A round, that may be different than if you're in later funding rounds versus, you are, thinking about, are we ready to go public? Usually we'll do a triage. And I know it's pretty typical for some of my peers who do similar stuff to say, oh, we're going to spend an hour talking about what you need. I tend to spend more time than that. I'll usually have several conversations over several hours. I'll usually ask for documents. And the way I like to structure it is, hey, let's take a real look at this first, and then let's agree to what makes sense in terms of a fee. There obviously is a cost, and so there's a cost benefit analysis. And if you're still early, if you're still scrappy, and you're not sort of at that level where you have a lot of funds, what we'll do is we'll prioritize stuff. We'll say, okay, so these are the first three things you need to do, and we'll price this out, as this certain model. And then these are the next things. And what I try to do is also give milestones. So I'll say, okay, when you're here, we need to start working on this thing. Here's the next milestone. We'll start working on these next three things. And so they can kind of have a plan in place and sort of understand, okay, we're going to start the year with this. And then in March, we're going to hit this milestone and start this next thing. And then by June, we're doing the next part of it, and so on. So we really try to build these things custom to the client. And then I will staff it custom to the client. So it's I'd like to be able to give you sort of a short, quick answer on how that works. But I think the best thing to do is to sit down and have a conversation, because, there is no one size fits all, especially for, startups, growing businesses. And I tend to work with a lot of emerging technologies. There is no playbook for that, and anybody who tells you there is not being honest. So, it does take a lot of sort of back and forth and working together. But I think that's where we get the best results too.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks a lot.
And thank you so much for listening to Legally Agile with Chris Werner. If today's conversation sparked questions about your own company, whether it's legal foundations, disputes, or getting deal ready, you can find more resources at vidarlaw.com/podcast. You'll also find fractional GC readiness checklists to help you decide if it's the right time for your business. If you found this helpful, please follow the show and share it with another founder or executive who would benefit. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.